My name is Becky Alexander. I'm a researcher with LHB, and I've spent the past 10 years or so tracking community scale performance indicators like energy use and greenhouse gas emissions for Minnesota cities through a program called the Regional Indicators Initiative. I'll give just a quick overview of the program, and then we'll be sharing some of our key findings from looking at 14 years of this data. This presentation will be available on the Regional Indicators Initiative website, along with a more in-depth version that includes a more detailed data analysis and call to action. The Regional Indicators Initiative grew out of Minnesota's Next Generation Energy Act of 2007, which set statewide emissions reduction goals. To meet these goals, in addition to federal and statewide action, Minnesota needed its communities to help drive emissions reductions at the local scale. To support this need, the Green Step Cities program was developed, providing a list of best practices that cities could voluntarily take on to improve their community's sustainability. However, when this program was launched in 2010, it didn't have a way of tracking how effectively these strategies were moving the needle towards sustainability, which is where the Regional Indicators Initiative was conceived as a way of tracking citywide performance metrics. And in fact, this helped contribute to the addition of steps 4 and 5 to the Green Step Cities program about 5 years ago, which are very metrics based. The Regional Indicators Initiative, or RII, tracks community-wide energy, water, travel, and waste data and translates these into greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the U.S. Community Protocol. These metrics track what's occurring in each community's geographic boundaries, so the electricity, gas, and water used within homes, businesses, and institutions, the travel that happens within the community's geographic boundaries, and the municipal solid waste generated within the community. Some of the emissions associated with these activities also occur within the community's geographic boundaries, like combusting gas to heat a building or gasoline to propel a car, while others occur outside the community, like in a power plant or a landfill. There's more information on the methodology and data sources on the Regional Indicators website. RII includes at least 1 year of complete data for 72 Minnesota cities, representing nearly half of the state's population. Because of the variability of our funding sources over the years and the differing abilities of each energy utility to provide citywide data, some cities just have a year or two of data, while others have up to 14 years from 2007 through 2020. Today I'll be showing trends over time for the 18 cities with complete data back to 2007, representing about 20% of the state's population. Feel free to contact me if your city isn't on this list and you're interested in getting your data added or updated. So let's dig into the findings. One thing that is relatively consistent between cities and over time is that the energy used in our buildings is the greatest contributor to emissions. So prioritizing strategies like efficiency and clean energy is important. We also need to address travel, which is another big piece of the pie. This pie chart does look slightly different for each city, depending on whether you have any large institutions or industries or any streets that see a lot of pass-through traffic. So looking at your own data can help you prioritize impactful actions for your community. The best use of this data is really to track your own progress over time. This is showing total annual emissions from the 18 cities with complete data from 2007 through 2020. Greenhouse gas emissions have decreased by over 30% since 2007, actually meeting the state's 2025 goal. And since our population has continued to grow, this equates to a 41% reduction in per capita emissions. But you may be remembering that 2020 was a bit of an odd year, especially for travel. So we'll take a look in a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted each metric. It is important to note that we've been able to decarbonize our cities more quickly than our state as a whole, which had only achieved a 5% reduction from 2007 levels in 2018 compared to our 15% reduction. This is due to things like agriculture, where we've not yet seen meaningful and sustained reductions. So cities really need to be exceeding the state's goals by even more to give us a shot at meeting them as a whole. Of course, cities have achieved different rates of reduction. Here we see the percent change in overall emissions from 2007 for each of the 18 cities. Though many of the cities have a similar overall trend, they vary in magnitude from a 19% reduction from 2007 to 2020 in Elk River to a 42% reduction in Bloomington. This reinforces our conviction that wherever possible, cities should be using their own data to track progress rather than relying on statewide averages. If we look at each emissions source separately, we see that the electricity sector has achieved dramatic reductions, over 50%. Gas has increased overall, though with a lot of dips and jumps over time. Travel remained relatively flat until the 20% drop during the pandemic in 2020. And waste, though too small to see at this scale, varied quite a bit, but was 11% lower in 2020 than in 2007. This graphic also gives a sense of the relative breakdown in energy by type and sector. The commercial industrial sector has more emissions from electricity than gas, while the opposite is now true for the residential sector. You can also see that to meaningfully impact gas emissions, we'll need to act across sectors, since there's pretty close to a 50-50 split between homes and businesses. We found the reduction in electricity emissions is due to a combination of reducing electricity use by 14% and using electricity that is 46% cleaner, progress that can be attributed both to policy, such as Minnesota's clean energy standards and the requirement to invest in energy efficiency through conservation improvement programs, but also to local action, like replacing light bulbs and appliances with more efficient models and investing in local renewable energy. And of course, our electric utilities are critical partners in this work. The progress being made to reduce the carbon intensity of our electricity also opens the door to the beneficial electrification of space heating and vehicle travel. But in order to electrify at the scale needed, we'll also need to reduce our energy loads. So let's take a look at how successfully we've been doing this in RII cities. We saw that the overall electricity use has decreased by 14%, while non-residential electricity use has dropped even more, with a median decrease of nearly 20% from 2007 to 2020. We can guess that much of these savings are coming from switching to LED lighting, along with participation in other conservation improvement programs, trends like shifting from desktop to laptop computers, and the impacts of citywide energy benchmarking ordinances for commercial buildings, like those in St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Edina, which are helping building owners better understand their energy use and act to achieve savings. Residential electricity use looks pretty flat here, though there may have been some shift from the commercial to the residential sector in 2020 due to the increase in working from home caused by the pandemic. But cities have been growing over this time period. So if we were to normalize by the number of households, we'd see a median decrease of 11% in household electricity use. Again, likely due to the adoption of LEDs and more efficient appliances and devices. Looking at gas, this is much more variable from year to year, but has not decreased over time. Both residential and non-residential gas use are very strongly correlated with weather trends, making our homes and businesses vulnerable to large swings in energy costs, as well as threatening their ability to provide adequate shelter if our energy supply is disrupted during a cold spell. So we need to weatherize our buildings. For homes, this means adding insulation, high-performance windows, and air sealing. Non-residential buildings may require a more diverse set of strategies depending on their unique situations. So that might be improvements to their roofs and walls, it might be addressing dock doors that are open in cold weather, or it could be ensuring that the building is taking advantage of the waste heat from their exhaust air. We also need to electrify our space and water heating in both homes and businesses. by switching to heat pumps, we can achieve efficiencies that are 3 times higher than a top-of-the-line gas furnace, since heat pumps are just moving energy rather than creating it. If we switch back to greenhouse gas emissions rather than BTUs of energy, we see that although electricity was the largest contributor to emissions back in 2007, the progress being made there has brought it to the same level as gas. And gas, of course, has not been getting cleaner and isn't able to get cleaner to the same extent as electricity is. So moving forward, we'll need to continue working toward carbon-free electricity while making a big push to shift heating, cooking, and process loads to use electricity. Moving on to vehicle travel. Prior to the pandemic, vehicle miles traveled stayed within 5% or so of its 2007 values, while the carbon intensity of each mile traveled decreased slightly as vehicles got replaced with more fuel-efficient models. This combination caused travel emissions to decline slightly through 2019. And then, of course, in 2020, vehicle miles traveled and emissions dropped by about 20% with the reduction in commuter traffic during the pandemic. The big question, of course, is how much of this 2020 reduction will be sustained as we find our new normal. And recently released 2021 data shows vehicle miles traveled rebounding by about 40% of what was lost, likely reflecting the continued prevalence of remote working. So we'll need to see another few years of data to understand the extent to which these new travel patterns will hold. In any case, in order to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals, we need to find a way to achieve a sustained reduction of vehicle travel, and we need to rapidly adopt electric vehicles for the remaining trips. These gradual improvements in fuel economy aren't getting us there fast enough. And finally, looking at waste, we see an overall increase in the waste being disposed over this time period, which is true even if we normalize to account for population growth. However, due to an increase in recycling rates, the emissions per ton of waste disposed has decreased, leading to an 11% drop in emissions from waste management. To achieve higher rates, we'll need to focus on waste reduction strategies in addition to continuing to increase recycling rates. I'll close out with just a quick summary of calls to action based on the data. First, if it's available, use your own data to prioritize opportunities, whether that means focusing on new development versus existing buildings and infrastructure, partnering with local institutions, or improving mobility options in a specific neighborhood. But even if you don't have city-specific data, there are things that every community needs to be working toward, including electrifying and weatherizing buildings, which can improve health, resilience, and equity in addition to reducing emissions, especially if this is done first for low-income households, which are the most vulnerable to both extreme weather and respiratory issues from burning gas indoors. Since gas equipment in buildings typically lasts for 20 to 50 years, it's especially critical that we stop installing new gas equipment. You can also act now to reduce reliance on vehicle travel by encouraging closer proximity between residents and businesses, supporting public transportation, and improving walkability and bikeability. For the vehicle trips that are still needed, support the rapid adoption of electric vehicles by ensuring adequate charging infrastructure, and ensure equitable access to EVs by strategies like affordable car share programs. In addition to advancing these strategies using the many policy, education, incentive, and leadership tools that local governments and community members have at their disposal, you can also work together to advocate for regional, state, and federal action, which we've seen can be very effective at moving the needle on topics like clean energy and energy codes, and has great opportunity to advance the electrification of buildings and vehicles. And then finally, track your progress. There are a lot of different variables in play, and it's easy to assume that your actions will make a difference. So prove it and adjust your approach accordingly. With that in mind, I'll leave you with a little demo of the Regional Indicators website, where you can dive into the data, review the findings from our data analysis, explore how different strategies would impact future energy emissions through our wedge diagram tool, and access additional climate action planning resources. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.